Severe floods in KwaZulu-Natal have once again wreaked havoc, causing a devastating impact on communities. Among the hardest hit are schools, with 24 institutions suffering significant damage, ranging from inaccessible roads to classrooms being destroyed. This adds to an already struggling education system grappling with budget constraints, infrastructure backlogs and the effects of past disasters. How does a province recover, and what are the long-term implications for learning? Joining me now is Dr. Anthea Cereseto, CEO of the governing body Foundation. Dr. Anthea, it's always good to speak to you. Now, the Education Department admits it is already financially strained. Given this, how realistic is it to expect quick recovery efforts for these schools?
Good afternoon. Regrettably, it's bleak, and it's really very disheartening to hear about this. And we need to think about the causes and the climate change and all that sort of thing. That's part of the discussion that needs to go on as well. But when it comes to the impact on learners and teachers trying to conduct the education business, it presents a really bleak picture. We've seen images of some of the damage to schools, and we know that schools, particularly the schools that are listed, do not have the funds in terms of school fees collected to make, minor maintenance sort of adjustments necessary to put things in order. So we do need the Department of Public Works infrastructure to come to the party to repair damaged schools, because it is beyond normal maintenance. Schools are given money annually in terms of whatever their allocation is, depending on the quintile the school is placed in, poorer quintiles and the richer quintiles where they raise fees, have money that is supposed to go towards maintenance, but it's small matters, it's not big issues. So we do have to pass these bigger maintenance disaster issues on to other departments responsible, and it would include the Department of Public Works. So, and I think they're called infrastructure now. So that needs to go there. The other thing that we do have to rely on is community. I think in South Africa, we know community action is powerful. And I think we have to rely on it to some extent in these cases, provided the schools themselves are structurally sound. If the school is being declared unfit for use, then the department in KwaZulu-Natal has to find an alternative place for these children to learn. And if they are in areas where there are community venues, such as community halls and places, even churches and things like that, we know that has happened in the past, that the learners have been moved to another place to have their lessons for a while. But the community can play a part in terms of contributing to materials necessary for repair if it's relatively minor, and also for cleaning up, because a lot of the damage is due to flooding and bringing down a lot of silt, and that has landed within schools and tossed the furniture around. So a lot of cleaning up, and the community could be harnessed to assist with that. But quite honestly, it is a depressing picture. I do hear that the principals and teachers have thought about it. They're on holiday now officially, but I suppose many of them are thinking of how they're going to restore teaching and learning time. We've heard that they've planned for longer sessions of school days once school returns. So I think principals and teachers are innovative. They will do their best. We have some who will shrug their shoulders and say it's somebody else's job, but for the most part, the schools and their staff will try to do their best for the children. I'm very disturbed because it's extreme weather conditions that in most cases aren't predicted. It also has meant in the recent time that children haven't been able to even access their schools because of swollen rivers, too dangerous to cross. We've seen images of that as well. So KwaZulu-Natal and indeed other provinces have suffered from extreme weather conditions. It's difficult. Circumstances in our country make access to education difficult, and that is extremely regrettable. And with less money available now, it's even more difficult.
Yeah, you've painted a very grim picture of what is obviously the reality that is before us, Dr. Anthea. Let's focus a little bit on the learners themselves and the sort of challenges that they go through. We've talked about the quality of classrooms, and many of these classrooms that they have to learn in are dilapidated, worsened by the floods that they've experienced in recent days. But let's talk about the trauma that they have to contend with, because some of their friends have been washed away, have died in these floods. Many of these children rely on that one meal that they get at school, courtesy of some of the various departments' feeding schemes. How do they cope with these challenges?
Right, this is a difficult question, Hugo. There's research, international research, about how climate events are having an impact on children across the globe. But it does always have a greater impact on poorer communities. It shows the gap between richer and poorer countries, and then within a country, the better resourced schools and learner families and the less well-resourced families. It always has a greater and more traumatic impact on those that have access to fewer resources. So there is evidence, there's research pointing to psychological distress. And I think children of all ages, everywhere, including South Africa, where the reality is in your face when you go to a school that has now been significantly damaged, is the impact of climate change. I think adults are not nearly as concerned about climate change as children are. It's an interesting factor that's been discovered, because they are the ones that think of their future and they see what's happening now, and they're actually fearful about, will it get worse in the years to come? And so they're taking the whole idea of climate change more seriously. So I think we need to work with the emotions and the psyche of children in schools. And once again, the less well-resourced schools don't have access to the professional people who can help children with these traumas, such as loss of fellow students. That's a real trauma to the whole school, and obviously particularly to those close to the children that have been lost through these floods and mudslides and these other dramatic events. So psychological support is really necessary. And once again, where possible, if the community can come in to help there. Yes, what else do you have on this really challenging topic?
Well, I do have a little bit more. I want to talk on classrooms and reconstruction of these classrooms in light of global warming and climate change. There are conversations that you've talked about that should be happening behind closed doors. Are there conversations about building classrooms that are to some degree resistant to the effects of this climate change that we're experiencing at the moment? Because one would imagine that...
Well, yes, really important question, because there is clearly a plan to develop infrastructure, and all unsafe buildings are supposed to have been identified, and there is a program, I do believe, to address these unsafe schools and build better schools. However, the monitoring of the quality of the building needs to be stricter. And I think, just as in areas where earthquakes are prone to happen, there are stricter building restrictions, and there is more put in place to make sure the buildings can withstand earthquakes to a certain level. In our circumstances, we need to look, where are schools located? Are they located in the right position? So it's no good rebuilding a school, that a poorly constructed school in an area that might be in the path of a flood. A swollen river, for instance, would then reflood the school. It needs to be built in an area that is safe and considered secure as far as possible from whatever extreme climate event might happen. And then the building materials and the building construction itself needs to be monitored, because we also know that there have been quite a number of buildings, not particularly in education, but in South Africa as a whole, where construction has been rushed, has been undertaken perhaps by construction companies that are not as proficient, not as ethical even, in terms of the materials and that are used, the strength of the concrete and that sort of thing. We have to make sure that when we do build, we build to a high standard. Obviously, it's an investment, and you cannot use money for the purpose of improving infrastructure if that infrastructure is not going to last. I'm sure you're aware of many schools in the country built in days gone by that are more than 100 years old and in really good condition for that sort of age. They do also need maintenance and roofing redone, etc. But they're still standing. And we need to build schools, rebuild these schools to the same high standards that they will also last beyond 100 years. Yeah, it's an important point, quality of construction.
Now, just how concerned is the Department of Education or Department of Infrastructure, if you will, around putting up the right sort of facilities for schools? And the reason I ask is because we've had multiple conversations around the prevalence of pit latrines in schools across much of South Africa. Are we convinced? I mean, how does the public get convinced that the various authorities are inclined to want to correct or fix the challenges around infrastructure that is under decay or that is broken down as a result of these floods, when issues around pit latrines for many, many years go unchecked?
Yes, look, the pit latrine story is a horrific story with the death of children, and serious attention has been given to it. And I believe the Minister of Basic Education just in the last few days announced the number of remaining pit latrines, which I think was something like 300 and something left. So from the very large number, it's been reduced. The Director General of the Department of Basic Education has been on a mission for the last number of years, going around inspecting these buildings, being there to make sure that they are built to a proper standard. And there have been photographs of these things. I do believe they've paid serious attention to doing the building of the toilet facilities in a much better manner. So I think that's been dealt with. Then when it comes to school infrastructure and the approval of plans and so on, so if a school wishes to add anything to it, it has to go through quite a rigorous process to get approval before you can build. And I think there are sufficient protections, but that's for existing buildings. When there's a brand new building built by the Provincial Education Department, whether it's under the Provincial Education Department or the Department of Infrastructure, sometimes it's not always as good as it ought to be. And there have been some schools built in incorrect places. There's a very notable one in Gauteng, which frequently gets mentioned in the media. And that's a great disappointment. But I do believe the list is there and people know it must be done. The same excuse that is used for many things is the money isn't there. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not, because we do know that in some provinces, money has returned to Treasury at the end of a financial year when it ought not to have been returned, it ought to have been spent. So sometimes they are tardy in getting the projects going. And, you know, when you do buildings, you do part payments at various stages of the building. So if the building takes too long and a certain amount of that building hasn't been erected, you can't pay the full amount. So it's also the speed of the building process, which prevents the departments paying in full, which prevents them actually using the money allocated. So there are a number of, what we call them, practical problems that hinder the intention, let's say, of the department. I think there is serious intent, but it requires enormous will, and everybody at all points in the system need to play their role with greater determination. I really think that's what we're lacking sometimes. You have this particular job. Now go for it with all your might, because children are depending on you for something better for their future. So I think that's what we need everywhere. It's let's do our jobs as well as we can. If we're in charge of some aspect of building, let's do it as efficiently and as well as we possibly can.
Always good to speak to you, Dr. Anthea Cereseto, CEO of the Governing Body Foundation, speaking to us around severely impacted schools, 24 schools damaged as a result of floods. And she argues that climate change is massively impacting poorer communities, and the psychological implications, psychological distress on those learners is absolutely incredible.